The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the Kingston estate, casting streaks of gold across the marble floors. The house stood like a monument to success, grand, silent, and meticulously ordered. Every inch of it reflected the man who owned it, Alexander Kingston, a billionaire CEO whose name commanded both fear and respect in every boardroom in the city. He was known for his sharp mind, cold logic, and his uncanny ability to predict every move his competitors made. But for all his power and wealth, there was one thing Alexander lacked, trust. To him, trust was weakness, and weakness had no place in his world. Years of betrayal had carved that belief deep into his soul. His father's business partner had embezzled millions, his ex-fiancée had used him to climb the social ladder, and the last housekeeper he had hired, one he had treated with kindness, had stolen a family heirloom before vanishing into the night. Since then, Alexander trusted no one. The Kingston estate had become his fortress, its staff selected through a screening process so strict it rivaled military security. Every servant was observed, every action recorded. That was how he lived, protected but painfully alone. It was on a particularly quiet Monday morning that Lily Hart arrived. She stood at the front door, her posture straight but her eyes nervous, clutching a small brown handbag against her chest. She couldn't have been older than 24, her hair tied neatly back, her uniform crisp and simple. When the butler, Mr. Hale, introduced her, Alexander merely glanced up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "You're the new maid," he said flatly. "You'll find that I expect perfection here. No excuses. No mistakes. Understood?" "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For days, Lily went about her work quietly, like a soft breeze moving through the vast halls of the mansion. She dusted the chandeliers, polished the silver, and organized Alexander's library with almost reverent care. She never lingered, never spoke unless spoken to, and always carried an air of gentleness that seemed out of place in a house built on cold formality. Yet there was something about her that unsettled Alexander. He would often catch her staring at the old portraits on the wall or smiling faintly at the garden flowers as if finding beauty in things he had long stopped noticing. One afternoon, as Alexander sat in his study reviewing quarterly reports, he noticed her reflection in the glass cabinet. She was kneeling near the fireplace, arranging the logs he had burned the night before. The way she worked, delicate, patient, and precise, made him pause. Most maids rushed through their chores, but Lily handled every item as if it mattered. That, to Alexander, was suspicious. No one was that careful unless they were hiding something. That evening, while sipping his scotch, a thought crossed his mind. What is she really after? He muttered under his breath. His instincts told him to find out, to test her like he'd tested others before. So, the next day, he called the staff together and said he'd be taking a nap in his private suite, instructing everyone not to disturb him. But when Lily entered to clean, he would already be there, pretending to sleep As he lay on the couch, his eyes half closed, Alexander listened to the faint sound of her footsteps approaching. His pulse quickened, though he didn't understand why. He told himself this was merely an experiment, to see if the quiet new maid was as honest as she seemed. But deep down, something else stirred, a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. When the door opened softly and Lily stepped in, he caught the faint scent of lavender and soap. She moved gently, placing a tray on the side table and glancing toward his still form. And as she took a hesitant step closer, Alexander Kingston, the man who trusted no one, prepared himself to see the truth about her. But he had no idea that what she was about to do would shake him more than any betrayal ever had. The soft creak of the door echoed faintly through the room as Lily Hart stepped inside, carrying a small silver tray balanced carefully in her trembling hands. On it sat a delicate porcelain teacup and a plate of warm scones, steam rising in gentle curls that carried the faint scent of chamomile. Her eyes flickered toward the couch, where Alexander Kingston lay with his arm draped over his forehead, his breathing slow and steady, feigning sleep. She hesitated in the doorway for a moment, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might wake him. But he didn't move. The powerful CEO, feared by hundreds, looked strangely peaceful, almost human in that stillness. Lily walked quietly across the room, her steps soft against the Persian rug. She placed the tray on the small side table, careful not to make a sound. Her gaze lingered on Alexander's face for a moment. In sleep, or what she believed was sleep, he didn't look cold or distant. The hard lines that normally shaped his expression had softened, revealing the ghost of a man who might once have known warmth. Her breath caught unexpectedly. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, she felt a deep ache stir inside her chest. "Mr. Kingston," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You must be so tired." Alexander heard every word, his heartbeat quickening under his composed exterior. He had expected her to snoop, to check drawers or perhaps look for valuables, something to confirm his suspicions. But instead, her words carried concern, not calculation. He remained still, waiting, listening. Lily sighed softly and adjusted the blanket over him, smoothing it gently across his chest. "You work so much," she murmured, almost to herself. "Even the strongest people need rest." Her fingers brushed the edge of his sleeve, lingering just a second longer than she intended before pulling away. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on a crystal decanter on the desk. For a brief moment, she studied it, then shook her head. "Too expensive," she whispered, smiling sadly. "Someone could sell just this and never have to work again." Alexander's chest tightened. There it was, the perfect opening. He waited for her to act, expecting the clink of glass or the shuffle of a pocketed trinket. But instead, Lily turned away. She didn't even touch it. She simply walked to the nearby window, pulling the curtain slightly so the sunlight wouldn't hit his face. Then, something unexpected happened. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, hand-stitched handkerchief, its edges embroidered with tiny blue flowers. She hesitated for a long moment before setting it gently on the table beside his tea. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "For when you wake up," she said softly. "Everyone deserves a bit of comfort." Alexander's breath hitched. The simplicity of the gesture, the sincerity in her tone, it disarmed him completely. He could feel his pulse throbbing in his neck as his chest filled with something foreign, something he hadn't felt in years, guilt. Guilt for suspecting her, for testing her, for assuming kindness was just another disguise. When Lily turned to leave, she paused once more at the doorway. Her hand rested on the frame, her shoulders slightly trembling. "I know you don't like people getting close," she whispered into the quiet. "But I hope one day you'll let someone in. You don't have to be alone all the time." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Alexander frozen on the couch, staring at the handkerchief that now lay beside him. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair, trying to steady his breath. The embroidery was clumsy but careful, the kind of detail that took time and love. No one had given him anything that wasn't part of a transaction in years, not since his mother's death. He turned the small square of fabric over in his hands, feeling the warmth of her sincerity linger on his fingertips. For the first time in his life, Alexander Kingston, the man who trusted no one, felt unsure of his own judgment. He had set out to expose her, to prove that everyone had a hidden motive. But Lily Hart had done something far more dangerous than stealing his possessions, she had touched his heart, And as the evening light faded into gold across the room, Alexander realized this was no longer just a test. It was the beginning of something far more complicated, something he couldn't control no matter how hard he tried. In the days that followed, Alexander Kingston found himself more distracted than he had been in years. He tried to focus on his empire, the never-ending meetings, the contracts that required his signature, the stock reports that demanded precision, but no matter how much he buried himself in work, his mind kept circling back to one thing, Lily Hart. He could still see her soft eyes as she adjusted his blanket, hear the whisper of her voice as she wished him peace, and feel the quiet sincerity in the handkerchief she had left behind. It unsettled him. He wasn't used to being affected by anyone, least of all a maid. Yet something about her felt different. Real. Every morning, he found himself watching her from a distance, never openly, but through reflections and corners. He saw how she moved quietly from room to room, her hands never idle, her steps light as air. But what fascinated him most was her gentleness. She always greeted the older gardener with a respectful nod, helped the cook carry heavy trays without being asked, and even took the time to leave small crumbs outside for the birds that gathered near the fountain. She wasn't performing kindness. She was kindness. And that confused Alexander, because in his world, people were kind only when they wanted something. Late one afternoon, as the mansion basked in the soft orange glow of sunset, Alexander caught sight of Lily sitting by the garden steps. She thought she was alone. Her head was bent, her fingers tracing the edges of a small, worn photograph in her lap. There was a sadness about her then, a quiet weight that dimmed the light in her eyes. Without thinking, he stepped outside, his polished shoes crunching lightly against the gravel. "You shouldn't be out here this late," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. Lily startled, quickly hiding the photo in her apron. I'm sorry, sir. I was just finishing up." But Alexander had already seen it. "That picture," he said softly, his voice lowering. "Who was that?" For a long moment, she hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the horizon. Then, slowly, she pulled out the photograph again and held it up. It showed a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, with a smile that mirrored hers. "My brother," she whispered. "His name is Evan. He's sick. I send money home every month for his medicine." Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. "And your parents?" "They passed away last year," she said simply, her voice trembling just enough to betray her pain. "I took this job because it paid more than anything else I could find. I didn't tell Mr. Hale about my situation because I didn't want pity. I just need to keep working." For the first time in a long while, Alexander didn't know what to say. He looked at her, this quiet, fragile girl who carried so much weight on her shoulders, and felt a pang of shame for ever doubting her. Her sincerity was undeniable. Every humble gesture, every small act of kindness, it all came from a place of quiet strength, not deceit. That night, after she retired to her small quarters in the servants' wing, Alexander sat alone in his study. The firelight flickered across his face as he opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his lawyer. His message was short but firm: increase Lily Hart's salary immediately. Double it. Effective tomorrow, He didn't tell her, of course. He wanted to see how she would react when she found out. Would she boast? Would she quit and leave? But when she discovered the change a few days later, her reaction stunned him. Instead of happiness, she went pale and rushed to his office, clutching the pay slip in her hands. "Sir," she stammered, standing before his desk, her eyes wide. "There's been a mistake. My salary, it's far too high. I can't accept this." Alexander leaned back in his chair, observing her silently. No one in his company had ever turned down money before. "It's not a mistake," he said finally. "Consider it recognition for your work." Her hands trembled. "You've already been generous enough. Please, she swallowed hard. "I only do what anyone else would do." He studied her for a long moment, the corners of his mouth softening into something almost like a smile. "No," he said quietly. "You do far more than anyone else would." Lily's eyes glistened as she bowed her head, murmuring a small thank you before leaving the room. As the door closed behind her, Alexander exhaled slowly, realizing something he couldn't ignore anymore: this wasn't just admiration. Somewhere between suspicion and curiosity, he had started to care. And that terrified him more than anything else in the world. The evening rain fell softly over the Kingston estate, tapping gently against the tall windows like a lullaby. The world outside shimmered in shades of silver and blue, and inside, the mansion felt unusually still. Alexander Kingston sat alone in his study, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the glass. The man who once prided himself on control now found his mind in chaos. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Lily's gentle smile, the sincerity in her gaze, the quiet strength behind her timid demeanor. She had changed something inside him, something he hadn't realized was still capable of feeling. And though he'd fought it at first, he could no longer deny it, he cared for her deeply, But Alexander Kingston was not a man who confessed easily. His entire life had been a fortress built on distance, emotional walls taller than his empire's skyscrapers. Yet, that night, he felt those walls cracking. He needed to see her again, needed to understand why this one fragile woman had broken through every defense he'd ever built. So, he decided to repeat the act that had first connected them, the night he pretended to sleep. When Lily entered his room that evening, she thought he was resting again. The lights were dim, the fireplace crackling softly, and Alexander lay reclined on the couch, his eyes closed. She approached quietly, holding a small tray with his nightly tea. Her footsteps were light, her movements careful as always. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, something sad, as though she were saying goodbye. She set the tray down and lingered by his side, studying his face in the golden glow of the fire. "You're not as cold as they say," she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "You hide it well, but I can see it now, the loneliness." She hesitated, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of his sleeve. "You've helped me more than I can ever repay. Because of you, my brother is getting better. Because of you, I have hope again." Alexander's heart pounded, every word sinking deep into him like a quiet confession. She took a shaky breath, her lips curling into a bittersweet smile. "I just wish I could help you the same way," she murmured, her eyes glistening. "You deserve to feel loved, Mr. Kingston, even if you'll never admit it." And just as she turned to leave, he opened his eyes. "Lily," he said softly. She froze, her breath catching as their eyes met. The shock on her face was almost childlike, her hand trembling at her side. You were awake." "I was," he admitted, his voice low and calm. "I heard every word." Color flooded her cheeks, and she looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." He stood, taking a step toward her. "You meant every word," he said gently. "And I needed to hear them." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "You think I helped you, but the truth is, you helped me. You reminded me what it feels like to be human again." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as he spoke. She had never seen the powerful CEO look so vulnerable, so real. "I was just doing my job," she whispered. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You were doing far more than that." His voice softened, breaking the silence between them. "You cared." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the firelight dancing between them, two souls who had been strangers bound now by something deeper than gratitude. And for the first time, Alexander didn't hide behind his pride. He reached for her hand, slowly, hesitantly, and when she didn't pull away, he held it gently in his. "Stay," he said quietly. "Not as my maid, but as someone who makes this house feel alive again." Lily's tears fell freely now, her heart swelling with emotion. She nodded wordlessly, her voice breaking as she whispered, "If you're sure, sir." He smiled faintly. "Alexander," he corrected softly. "Call me Alexander." From that night on, the Kingston estate was no longer a cold fortress of solitude. It became a home, filled with laughter, warmth, and something Alexander thought he'd lost forever, love. The man who once pretended to sleep to test a stranger now woke each morning to a life that finally felt real. And every time he saw Lily smile, he was reminded that sometimes, trust doesn't come from tests, it comes from the quiet grace of someone who chooses to care anyway.